I literally told myself yesterday that I needed to stop watching camera reviews, and well, here we are. All right, guys, for those of you who are new here, which, let's be honest, it's probably all of you. I think I only have like 600 subscribers. My name is Joseph Morris. I'm a filmmaker based out of the North Alabama area, and today I'm going to be reviewing my camera, the C500II. I have never reviewed, actually that's a lie, I've reviewed some products, but definitely not a camera before. I am a huge watcher of camera reviews. I have never contributed to the camera reviews on YouTube, so this is my attempt at that. So the C500 is an interesting camera, and I hope to kind of break some of that down in this video. But when I was doing my research on if I wanted to purchase this camera or not, there was not a lot of recent content on it, which I think is quite the shame, because this is a pretty neat camera. So yeah, let's just get into it, why I got it, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and maybe why you should consider it if you're looking for a new camera. In 2023, we can claim 2023 now. You see those videos where it's like, is this camera worth it in this year? Every camera is worth it in every year. It's a tool, it's what you make of it, whatever. Let's get off my soapbox. So let me just kind of explain a little bit about, I guess, why I got this camera. So I was a C200 shooter for 2 years, I think just about 2 years. Just to kind of give some background on the work that I do, I kind of operate in a lot of different areas, which, you know, maybe some of you do as well. I do music video work, commercial, corporate work, and also documentary style work as well. And just for the longest, I've needed a camera that could kind of hop in between those different genres, those different jobs, that could just hang with me through all of that work. And fortunately, Canon has been the go-to camera system for me. So the C200 kind of represented a perfect middle ground camera for all of those things. But at the middle of last year, around July timeframe, I was needing an upgrade. A lot of people talk about the lack of 10-bit in the C200, which is true. The lack of 10-bit wasn't necessarily a problem for me. It was within the 8-bit codec, those files are constrained to a Rec. 709 color space. The reds in Canon's Rec. 709 gamut are kind of weird and wonky, and so it would skew colors into certain directions that I was not a fan of, and because it's such a small color space, it makes it a little bit more difficult to correct. So that was more of like a nitpicky, like, filmmaker look. I'm confident that nobody would have been able to tell the difference, but in terms of, you know, being proud of your work and you know, wanting, just, you know, having a sense of ownership and pride about your work, it was something that I wanted to, you know, fix, I guess, in a way. I don't know. So anyway, all that to say, around that time, I knew that I wanted to get a new camera. And so I really only had 3 options. I was considering, I had looked at some other cameras. I never really considered anything from Sony's Cinema line. I had briefly considered the red Komodo, and even some older red DSMC2 bodies. I think it was the red Scarlet W that I was looking at used. And so those were, you know, just from an image perspective, I think those cameras are really compelling options. But when you think about what you get just as an all-in-one system with Canon, I don't think I was ready to give that up coming from the C200. So like I said, I had 3 options. It was either going to be the C70, C300 Mark III, or the C500 Mark II. And so I rented all of them, like any sane person does. So I rented the C70 first. I had some issues with the C70. I think I'm just gonna say it's a great camera. It's got a really great image. I used it on a music video, and one of the things that I did not like about it was the form factor. It's just, you know, a chunky DSLR, and while that may work for some people, I was not a big fan. And one of the things that I really loved about these Canon, at least the bigger bodies, is they have, you know, this rotating handle on the side here, where you can manipulate it to any angle that you want to. And I really love that about the C200. So not having that on the C70 became an issue just because of the way I operate the camera. Sometimes I like to, you know, just kind of hand hold it, cradle it like this, or I can, you know, move it up high, move it down low. It just makes it a whole lot easier to do that. And I have my grip at a slight angle, which is very comfortable for me, but you have to imagine the C70, it's just locked solid straight. And so it's just not a very comfortable camera to handhold. So that was an issue. And then another issue that I came in, that I was experiencing was micro jitters, which I, when shooting with the C200, it had enough density and weight to it where I never really experienced that. But on that music video shoot, I remember going back and watching footage and seeing just those tiny micro jitters, and yeah, I just wasn't used to seeing that in a while. And so that camera's it's just too light. I had this 18-35 lens on there, and just hand holding it, getting the style of shots that I like to get when I'm shooting music videos, the micro jitters were becoming an issue for me. So those two issues really kind of put the C70 out of the running for an A camera for me. So that left the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. So the two things with those cameras I had to look at was what was I gonna appreciate more? I could either have a 4K 120 Super 35 sensor, or I could have a full frame 6K 60p sensor. And when I kind of, did my pros and cons list, I figured that the creative advantages of having a full frame sensor versus the creative advantages of having 120p, this full frame sensor outweighed having 120p. And so yeah, I just kind of set my sights on, well, let me see what the C500 has to offer. So I rented this for kind of a documentary gig, and exactly what I was kind of thinking, having full frame and Super 35 in one body. I don't really care so much about full frame just because it's full frame, just having the creative advantage of if I'm shooting full frame and I can punch in on Super 35 to get a little bit tighter, that can save the shot in a documentary world. So the advantage of having that in a camera meant a whole lot more than having 4K 120p. So I actually ended up buying this shortly thereafter. I bought this actually used from Lens Rentals. Lens Rentals has a really cool program where they sell the cameras that they rent out on I don't know when their cameras go kind of into life in a sense, but the cameras where they're no longer gonna rent them out, they're actually sell them for a pretty decent price. So I bought mine from Lens Rentals, and yeah, so that's how I have the camera. So I guess I'll kind of go into what I don't like about the camera. I think that's probably the best. It's not many things. The first thing is the placement of these audio controls. I know it's been said before, but it's probably the only thing that I really don't like. The C200 had them on the back here, and when I'm solo opping, when it's just me on set or on a job, and especially if I have to run audio, it's such a hassle to try to remember which direction. I think it's if I turn it, I can't even remember it now, like it's so confusing, but turning it back, I guess if I have to think of it, if I'm looking towards it, counterclockwise would be going up in volume, the other direction is down, but then remembering input 1 is up here, input 2 is down here. And sometimes I like to ride the volume a little bit, so I have this input 1 at the regular gain of the microphone and input 2 at a lower decibel. So just not being able to see those is pretty frustrating. I know that there's some I think there's some auto gain modes here. Yeah, I've never used them. I prefer to kind of do that manually by myself, but that's probably the only thing that I really don't like. I remember watching a video from Armando from Mando Bytes. He had suggested that what Canon should have done was the card slots are right here on the camera. What they really should have done is put the audio controls right here and then shifted the card slots to this side, which I agree, because the cards, you're gonna take a look at it once, put the cards in, and you're not gonna think about it again until you have to take the cards out. So having audio controls on the operator side would have been nice. So that's the first thing I don't like. The second thing, and this is kind of getting into some nitpicky territory, is the battery life. Compared to my C200, it's definitely half. I mean, this battery, I might get an hour out of it. It's typically 45 minutes. So, this is, it's workable, and I have the BPA 60 as well. This gets you about 2 hours. I don't typically use this. I have the full frame V-mount plate, and I just slap a V-mount on there because this gets pretty uncomfortable, especially when I'm hand holding it. This just kind of juts into your arm and into your stomach there, so it's not fun. But yeah, that's. But on that note, I can complain about the battery life compared to my C200. But one thing I think people maybe tend to forget about is I think the power draw of this camera is like 31 watts, which is, for what you have inside of here, it's a 6K full frame sensor that can, ratchet up to 60 frames per second. If you think about Arri cameras or Red cameras, I think Arri cameras, they're peaking anywhere from 90 to 100 watts, and Reds are usually hovering between the 50 and 70 watt mark. You know, this 98 watt or 90, little bit under 100 watt hour battery V-mount is gonna last 3 hours on this camera. It's gonna last 1 hour on an Arri and less than that, or you know, maybe a little bit more on a Red. So, you know, I nitpick, but all things considered, this still has pretty great battery life compared to the competition. I think Canon really has, you know, documentary shooters in mind when they make their cameras. And so being able to, I mean, the fact that I can still take one of these batteries and put it in here and not have to use a V-mount, I think is still pretty cool. All right, I think that's honestly all that I disliked. So let's talk about the things that I do like. Number one, I just, this camera can keep up with me. I don't know, it's like I said before, I do a whole lot of different types of work, whether it's, you know, music videos, corporate commercial style work, documentaries, and I need a camera that can keep up with the style of work, with the type of work that I do and the style of how I shoot. There are jobs where I am a single person on set, and then there's other jobs where I have, you know, maybe 10 people, 20 people on set. Having a camera that can kind of scale with me in that matter is really important. So Canon cameras, I think cinema cameras do that, and definitely this camera in particular. Next thing is just the image quality. I really like the image coming out of this camera. I was already really happy with the C200. This camera just kind of takes it just a small step upward, but it's enough to where it's like I'm not gonna need another camera for a pretty long time. One of the things that's really interesting compared to the C200 is I think this camera has better highlight roll-off, highlight retention, and cleaner shadows. So at the edges of, you know, your dynamic range, you're getting better for performance compared to the C200. Again, you can create really beautiful images with the C200, and I still think for, you know, the price of the C200 it's an incredible camera. But this is kind of taking care of some of those edge cases for you. Another thing, if you want to put the dynamic range to numbers, I think CineD rated this camera at is it 13, a little over 13.1 stops, I believe. And they rated the Mini LF at 13.5. So, I mean, if you think about it, this is a, you're getting pretty close to the performance dynamic range wise of an Arri Alexa, you know, Mini LF. Not that numbers are everything, but if you think about, you know, for the price, the features that they give you in this camera and performance, it's like you have no excuse to not go create something out there. This has what you need. So dynamic range is no longer an excuse, you know, color science isn't an excuse. And even on the topic of color science, Canon has really beautiful color science. I know that's said, you know, a lot. I have a different take on that phrase. I think Canon probably has the most pleasing neutral color science. What I mean by that is that Arri cameras have a look, Red cameras have a look, Sony cameras have a look, and I haven't had the chance to shoot on an Arri, but I've shot on Red, Sony, and Canon. And with Canon, their image, I find myself fighting against the look of the camera the least. And some of that is, yeah, you can get used to a camera, get used to its quirks and how to, you know, kind of massage the image. But for me, all of Canon cameras that I've shot with have given me the best neutral starting place. So as I said before, whether I'm shooting whatever different type of job that I'm shooting, it gives me, you know, a neutral foundation to push my grade into a different direction. I'm no longer fighting the camera. I think straight out of camera, I don't have to do too much for corporate commercial work with this camera. If I want to take it in a creative direction for music videos, it's very easy to do that. For documentaries, maybe that wants, you know, that job deserves a different look. I like having a neutral starting point. And I think Canon has really strong color science for that. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the full frame debate, you know, full frame versus Super 35. I'll be completely honest, most of the time, like when I'm shooting creative work, I'm actually shooting in Super 35. I have the 18-35 on here right now, and I'm shooting Super 35 RAW. I think of it as like having a baby C200 in here. I really love, you know, the look of this lens in that Super 35 format, so I actually shoot that quite a bit. Part of that reason is because the 6K RAW is insane. It's 2.1 gigabits a second, and so I can't, I have raids upon raids, and I still don't want to shoot that format. But I do think to an extent, like Super 35 is, or excuse me, full frame is a little overrated. And we're starting to see that, like these new Super 35, the Alexa 35, Sony just released the FX30. There's a lot. I think Super 35 is definitely here to stay. And we're gonna continue to see new cameras made in that format. But I think full frame really should just be seen as a creative tool. If you know, math-wise, I can get the same image out of full frame as I can, or out of Super 35 as I can from full frame. It's really just due to the physics of the lenses. If I had a 35mm f1.4 on full frame, I think I'd have to have, I think it's a 24mm and then like an f0.9. So like it's doable. There's just maybe not many lenses that, you know, are built to those specifications. So, but that's not an inherent trait of full frame that makes it better than Super 35. It should just be seen as a creative choice. So that's the way I see it. Most of my commercial work, I'm actually shooting the 10-bit full frame mode. I've shot a little bit of 6K RAW, but it's mostly in 10-bit. But as I said before, any creative work, I'm typically in the Super 35 4K RAW mode. I think it looks really good. It's been clean. The noise performance is definitely better than the C200. So that's maybe my bias. It may be noisy, but I'm coming from a camera that was already pretty noisy. So yeah, I think it's just, what do you want to shoot with? I came from a crop sensor background. My first camera was a Canon T5i. That's a crop sensor camera. So I got used to crop sensors. So I think full frame can be a creative advantage, but it's not necessary, obviously, to create beautiful images. Another reason I was wanting to get this camera and was considering it at the time was it has anamorphic shooting modes, which technically speaking, you can shoot anamorphic on any camera. I get that. I was shot quite a bit, honestly, on the C200. It was a 17:9 sensor, so it was a super wide image, but I used this lens here. It's, maybe some of you are familiar with this company. I think it's Rapido or Rapido. I don't know how you say it. I'm gonna say Rapido. But they have these housings for the old projector lenses, and then you can attach a taking lens to it. So I shot some anamorphic work with the C200 on this lens. I have not used this lens on here. I haven't shot any anamorphic on a professional gig yet. It's just mostly been, you know, creative stuff that I like to do personally. But one thing that I really liked about this camera was there's a lot of cameras out there that have open gate Super 35 sensors. So the many models of the Alexa have open gate sensors. Some Panasonic cameras have open gate sensors, and the advantage of being able to shoot on those is that sensor is actually taller than Super 35. So the 2x stretch that you get from a lens, you're actually making more use of, if you want to call it, the imaging circle of the anamorphic lens. The cool thing about this is because you have a full frame sensor, you can kind of cheat your way to an open gate Super 35 mode. So there's a couple of crop modes in the camera. There's a 4x3 mode and a 6x5 mode that will give you, it's a couple of different, one of them is 2.39 to 1, and I think the other one is 2.66 to 1, I believe. So it gives you a little bit of room to crop the left or right. But I just saw that as an advantage of this camera. Again, you can shoot anamorphic on any camera, but when it comes to the post workflow of anamorphic, this camera, maybe would be a little bit easier. So I'm eager to, shoot with some anamorphic lenses. There's a lot of really inexpensive options out right now. I really want to try some of the Greatjoy lenses. Sirui is not making anything for EF and PL yet. I think Laowa made a line, the Nanomorph line, and then Atlas, of course, you've got the Orion lenses, and then they've got their new Mercury line. So I'm eager to really give those a spin on this camera at some point. All right, I think I've kind of talked about everything that I wanted to with this camera. Again, I didn't go over everything because this camera it's already been reviewed, it's been out. So a lot of you know about this camera already, but I just kind of wanted to touch on some reasons why I wanted to get the camera. In a lot of respects, I think maybe this camera is too much for me. Then there's some days where I was like, this was the perfect purchase. So to answer that sort of proverbial question, is this camera right for you? Like, it's cliche, but only you know that. What I can say is this: Canon cinema cameras, they're just built, in my opinion, for everything you can throw at them. And they really work well for those guys like me who are solo operators who need a camera that can hang with them on the jobs where like I'm the only one on set, and then the jobs where there's multiple people on set. It fits all of those types of jobs. So I do think the C70 is probably the better all-around camera for most people. It has incredible image quality, and it's much cheaper than this body. If you can get around those two issues that I couldn't, the form factor and just, you know, the weight, having to rig it up, all that kind of stuff, I think it's a fantastic camera. I've used it, I've shot with it as a B camera. The fact that they added RAW and all these updates to it, it's just incredible. So that's probably gonna be the better camera for most people. But people like me who liked the larger camera, this is a pretty good bet, and I'm hoping that they'll continue to add some more features to these bodies. I really feel for C500 Mark III owners, the C70 has just completely taken over from their kind of ownership perspective. This camera has fared a little bit better in terms of resale value, but on that note, there's a couple things that I think Canon can add to this camera that I think will make it still help make it a compelling purchase this year and the years to come. I hope they really do add the reduced bitrate RAW options on this camera. I was looking at a data sheet for the Canon R5C. The R5C has a 5.9K Super 35 mode. So I'm assuming that the data rates for the same resolution are gonna be pretty equal. And I believe at like 24 or 25p and 5.9K, the RAW LT is somewhere between 500 and 600 megabits per second, which I would love to have like a low quality option, low quality RAW option like that in camera. There's some times where just objectively 12-bit is richer than 10-bit. And that's why I use RAW in a lot of my creative work. And so being able to have a codec where I can have 12-bit here, but I don't have to shoot at 2.1 gigabits per second would be really advantageous. So Canon, if you're watching this, please don't neglect your C300 Mark III and C500 Mark II owners. I think being able to add those variable bitrate options would be a really good bonus for us owners, and I know a lot of us really appreciate it. Other than that, I think that's it. I think that's the only thing that I would really want to add to this camera. Like I said, it's it's basically the perfect camera for me. I was telling one of my buddies the other day, I don't see myself buying another camera, hopefully for the next 5 years. You know, obviously camera technology is going to continue to advance, but for right now, this is all I need.